He had threatened and cajoled. On June 15th, Belarus's dictator dropped a bombshell unlike any other. This wasn't a threat. It wasn't a grand proclamation about the inevitability of Russia's victory in Ukraine. For the first time in 4 years, Lukashenko has woken up and realized that maybe, just maybe, being Putin's lapdog isn't exactly great for a country that borders the 2026 version of Ukraine, which could send missiles and drones into Belarus in a heartbeat. And now, after years of threats and claims, Lukashenko is doing the one thing that Putin never expected him to do, apologizing and backing down. In its report on an interview Lukashenko gave to the Al Arabiya outlet, the Kyiv Post reveals that the Belarusian dictator has done a complete 180 in his rhetoric and is now calling for peace between Russia and Ukraine. Lukashenko labeled the very prospect of Belarus getting involved in Putin's war as absurd, and went to great lengths to point out that his ancestors are buried in Ukraine and that many in his country have close ties to the victims of Putin's ambition. Belarusian families live in Ukraine, and Ukrainian families live in Belarus, and in our south. There are joint families. They got married, raised children, and lived like normal people. There was no border, Lukashenko said as he waxed lyrical about a more peaceful time before Putin started his rampage. We have the feeling that somebody has just swallowed a big dose of buyer's remorse, and there are plenty of reasons why Lukashenko is backpedaling. Lukashenko's claims of Ukraine and Belarus once living in harmony are a complete turnaround from the rhetoric that he has spent the entire war spouting. For over 4 years, Lukashenko has been the loyal lapdog, aggrandizing Putin at every turn, allying his country with Russia, and calling Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy every name in the book, including once labeling him as scum. Now, in addition to his longing for a simpler time, Lukashenko has also sent an apology directly to Ukraine and its leader. If Volodymyr Alexandrovich was offended, I apologize to him for these words, Lukashenko said, using the middle name of Ukraine's president for some reason. He added that Ukraine can rest assured that there is no fight coming from his country. No military action should be expected from Belarus, and especially from me. Granted, Lukashenko colored this apology with claims that he only made the remarks that he made due to Ukrainian threats about how it could take him out if it needed to. But even with that excuse, this is a remarkable transformation in the stance that Lukashenko is taking toward Ukraine. And to understand just how remarkable, we need to take a journey through a war in which Lukashenko has for so long been happy to play the role of marionette to Putin's puppet master. We start in February 2022. Belarus didn't shy away from getting involved in the war back then, when Putin was amassing his forces and Russia was simultaneously claiming that it wasn't about to invade Ukraine, while preparing a so-called special military operation that was supposed to result in Ukraine's fall in just a matter of days. Lukashenko bought into the bull. Seemingly convinced that Putin and his forces would steamroll Ukraine, the Belarusian dictator allowed Putin to not only plant troops on his territory, but to use Belarus as one of the staging grounds for the entire invasion. Over the winter before Putin invaded, over 30,000 Russian troops entered Belarus under the guise of a training exercise. But what they were really doing was preparing to cross the 1,084-kilometer border that Belarus shares with Ukraine. On February 24, 2022, they did just that. And though Russia made some rapid progress early on, reportedly coming close to capturing Zelenskyy himself during the early hours, The Guardian reported in April 2022, Ukraine mounted a fearsome defense. Russia was pushed back. Soon, a wave of Western support came flowing in, and the nation that was supposed to be steamrolled started its evolution into the military power that it is today. That should have been a warning for Lukashenko. The all-powerful Russia's failure to capture a much smaller nation should have told Lukashenko that his trust in the power of Putin was misplaced. But the tough talk and support for Russia continued for over 4 years. Lukashenko certainly had plenty to say after Belarusian anti-government organization Bipol took out a Russian A-50 AWACS plane that was stationed at the Mashalishchi Air Base in Belarus in February 2023. 2 explosions took out $350 million of Russian hardware in the process. It appeared Lukashenko was ignoring yet another warning. Lukashenko continued to provide support for Putin, along with carrying out joint military exercises in Russia, often close enough to Ukraine's border to make it clear that these exercises were supposed to be a threat. In January 2025, Lukashenko declared that he had no regrets about allowing Russia to use Belarus as an invasion staging ground, going so far as to claim that Putin is like his older brother. At the time, there was no sign of the 180 we've just seen. And if anything, Lukashenko started to ramp up the tough talk in 2026. On May 12th, Lukashenko appeared to lose his mind as he declared that Belarus was going to selectively mobilize military units to prepare them for war. He did add the caveat of, "God willing it can be avoided." But all indicators seem to point towards Belarus's dictator preparing his country for a fight, and there could only be one nation that Belarus would have to fight: Ukraine. The remarks came in the wake of inspections and exercises having been carried out involving 6,000 reservists and personnel. And speaking about exercises, Belarus seemed to take an even larger step toward becoming more directly involved in the Ukraine war than it had ever been before. May 21st saw trucks carrying intercontinental ballistic missiles rumble into the forests of Belarus. They were there as part of a series of military exercises conducted in the country's territory alongside Russia. Both Putin and Lukashenko watched the exercises, which were created to ensure that Belarusian soldiers would be able to prepare and deploy tactical nuclear weapons as soon as Russia commanded. After 3 days of drills had come to an end, it seemed for all the world that Lukashenko had finally handed the Belarusian military over to Russia to do with as it will. But now here we are. Less than a month after those drills were completed, Lukashenko is apologizing to Zelenskyy, claiming that his declarations that Ukraine's leader is scum and a Nazi were made in anger and were unfair to a man who is fighting for his country's collective life. So the question has to be asked, why has Lukashenko backed down and apologized? We could point to all sorts of reasons, such as the fact that May 20th saw the new Voice of Ukraine reveal that 80% of Belarusians oppose the notion of their country participating in Putin's war. That would have been a splash of cold water delivered to Lukashenko's face. As he got all hot and bothered on Putin's command, the vast majority of his people were telling him that they absolutely would not accept the call to war that Lukashenko seemed to be preparing. Saving his own skin to maintain his dictatorship may well have been all of the motivation that Lukashenko needed to crawl at least partially from underneath Putin's thumb. But there's more to it than that. Beyond mere self-preservation, there are 3 reasons why Lukashenko has just conducted the 180 that nobody saw coming, and all 3 have combined to force the Belarusian dictator onto his knees as he bows down to Ukraine. However, we have a quick side note before we dig deeper. This is the military show, and what you're seeing is the reason why we make videos. To show how power moves and what influences the decisions that men like Lukashenko make. If you want to see, make sure that you are subscribed to the channel. So the 3 reasons. The first has nothing to do with Ukraine. It's all about Russia. During his interview, Lukashenko revealed that for all of his tough talk, he knows that Belarus would almost certainly be wholly reliant on Russia for defense if it ever got directly involved in the Ukraine war. That much has always been a given, but the big reveal here is that Lukashenko knows what this really means. Belarus couldn't rely on Russia to provide enough help to protect its territory. Joining the conflict would be unacceptable and would leave Belarus vulnerable, Lukashenko says, as he asserts that he has said as much to Putin before. "We have said many times that it is absolutely unacceptable for the war between Ukraine and Russia to spill over onto the territory of Belarus. Putin and I discussed this issue," Lukashenko claims. This is a rare moment of clarity for Belarus's insane dictator, but it's not a revelation that has come out of nowhere. For as crazy as Lukashenko can appear to be, he is at least smart enough to see that the last couple of years have shown just how much Russia's supposed protection means when push comes to shove. Putin spent years building Russia's geopolitical influence on the promise of delivering protection to allies. But that facade started to crumble back in December 2024, when Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad and his regime crumbled under a rapid rebel uprising. Putin did nothing to protect a man who was supposed to be one of his closest allies, and had even privately started to grow frustrated with al-Assad for refusing to offer concessions in negotiations prior to his fall. Fast forward to 2026, and Lukashenko has watched things go from bad to worse for leaders who ally themselves with Russia. Nicolas Maduro, who led Venezuela and was building strong ties with Russia, was taken out of commission by a January US raid that led to him being detained and extracted. At the start of Operation Epic Fury in Iran, the US killed Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. In both cases, these leaders had spent heavily on Russian weapons and trusted that Putin would go into bat for them if they ever faced threats. But just as we saw with al-Assad, Russia did little more than issue weak condemnations as all of its supposed support crumbled. Even as recently as April, Lukashenko would have seen Russia's Africa Corps withdraw from a key settlement in Mali, once again showcasing how little Putin's promises of protection mean when they're put to the test. Even somebody like Lukashenko can't ignore the clear message that this sends. even when he has the benefit of a ruling country that is directly connected to Russia. If Belarus starts a fight with Ukraine, Russia won't be there to help, and Lukashenko knows it. That's why he's saying that Belarus is vulnerable. He's watched entire regimes fall as Putin did nothing, and he's watched for years as Russian air defense systems fail over and over to stop Ukrainian drones and missiles from striking targets on Russian territory. Overpromising and then under-delivering on protection is the Russian way. Putin's credibility has been shot to pieces by his own actions. States that might have been falling under Russia's sway, such as Nicaragua, Cuba, and many small African nations that have watched what happened in Mali, are now questioning the wisdom of trusting Russia when it's become clear that Putin will always look out for number one. Lukashenko is likely asking himself the same questions that those nations are asking. And though it's too late for him to simply avoid throwing his eggs into the Russian basket, he's now trying to carefully remove those eggs because he knows that he can't trust Russia to back Belarus in a fight. Nobody can. But let's come back to that comment about Belarus being vulnerable. That claim is more revealing than you might realize, as it doesn't just refer to how unlikely it is that Russia will be able to protect Belarus. It also shows us the second reason why Lukashenko is issuing apologies and trying to backpedal away from an entire war's worth of bluster. Belarus's dictator knows that Ukraine could hit his territory at will, and there's nothing he would be able to do to stop it. So they're striking targets, they're not hitting the front. The Ukrainians are striking civilians, historical and cultural monuments, oil refineries and factories. They're striking all over Russia, all the way to the Urals, with drones. That's the kind of war we have now, Lukashenko claimed in his interview. Let's back up for a second before we explore what this really means. Civilians, Lukashenko? If anybody is doing that, it's Russia, and you know it. According to the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, 16,126 Ukrainian civilians are confirmed to be dead as a result of Russian strikes, with another 46,590 being injured as of May 31st. On June 15th, the very day that Lukashenko made his apology, a Russian strike killed 11 people. It's Russia that targets civilians, not Ukraine. However, the core of Lukashenko's message is that Ukraine has developed a capability that Putin likely assured him would never exist. Deep strikes are the name of the game for Ukraine, especially in 2026, and the Belarusian dictator is watching target after target burn in Russia. The numbers tell the story. May saw Ukraine log its heaviest deep strike month of 2026 so far, as it attacked 18 oil and gas facilities across Russia using drones and missiles, along with many other targets. According to The Economist, Ukraine is on track to complete 800 strikes on Russian territory by the end of the year, assuming it maintains the same pace that we've seen so far in 2026. When Lukashenko says that Belarus is vulnerable, what he means is that the country can't do a thing to stop Ukraine's aerial assaults, and those assaults would come thick and fast. Belarus borders Ukraine, which makes it incredibly easy to hit, and at just 207,595 square kilometers, Belarus is also a much smaller target to hit than Russia. All of its valuable hardware and industrial facilities are compacted rather than spread around a vast nation, as is the case with Russia. If Ukraine chooses to strike, it would have an embarrassment of riches when it comes to targets, and Belarus simply wouldn't be able to stop the onslaught. Belarus is very vulnerable militarily because Belarus is exposed to the Ukrainian military like we are in the open palm of their hand. We fully understand that our key life support facilities, industrial and logistical, would come under attack, Lukashenko said, and he's absolutely right. Ukraine has Belarus's number, militarily speaking, and there is nothing to gain from Lukashenko following through on all of his tough talk. So he's taking the opposite approach, begging for forgiveness in the hope that he'll never have to see Ukrainian drones fly into the energy facilities of a country that earns about $2 billion per year from selling refined oil products or acting as a middleman for Russian oil and gas sales. And so we come to the final reason why Lukashenko just did a 180. And again, it's hinted at in one of the quotes we shared. Lukashenko realizes that Belarus is exposed to Ukraine's military in the aerial battle, but that exposure extends to every aspect of the Belarusian military. The simple fact is that a minnow like Belarus simply can't compare to Ukraine's strength, which is an issue compounded by the Russian protection dilemma that we've already mentioned. Let's look at the numbers. On May 20th, in the wake of Lukashenko's threats about mobilization, the New Voice of Ukraine reported on comments made by a Ukrainian member of parliament named Roman Besmertsny. He revealed that Belarus has a conscript army of about 46,000 soldiers, but it has a colossal shortage of ammunition and equipment, especially in the armored vehicle department, to support that army. Russia has siphoned off most of the stockpiles that Belarus has, Besmetsny said, which practically leaves Belarus defenseless. Even if the army had supplies, Ukraine is at the point where it's causing over 30,000 casualties per month against Russia's army. That's 2/3 of the Belarusian military wiped out in a single month, and the rest won't last to see the end of next month. There is literally nothing, militarily speaking, that Belarus can hold over Ukraine outside of Russia stationing nukes on its territory. Ukraine has 900,000 active personnel in its ranks and 4 million reservists, Global Firepower points out. Ukraine spends $45 billion per year on its defense, which is also 45 times more than Belarus. Ukraine has doubled the number of aircraft and far more experience in flying them, along with double the number of tanks and close to 40,000 more armored vehicles. Then there are the drones. Millions of FPV drones, tens of thousands of long-range and mid-range strike drones. This metal army is unlike anything that Belarus will have faced in its entire history, and it would end any fight that Lukashenko tries to start in a heartbeat. Take these three issues and you get why one of Putin's favorite puppets is backing up and bowing down to Ukraine. The war is practically taking place in our own backyard. We don't want this war, because we could suffer just as much as the Ukrainians and Russians are suffering, Lukashenko said as his interview came to a close. He added, "And I've always believed this conflict should be ended and peace agreements should be reached between the conflicting parties." Well, you haven't always believed that, have you, Lukashenko? You wouldn't have supported Putin for so long and so directly if you did. But now Lukashenko finally seems to have realized that he is a minnow trying to square up to a Ukrainian titan. The fight would be hopeless. Belarus would be wiped off the map, or as 80% of the population don't support participation in the war, and they would simply refuse to fight. Lukashenko may be backing down because he's terrified. Still, it's something, and it's better late than never. Putin's puppet has just cut a string. Maybe more will follow in the months to come. What we're seeing here seems to be a moment of clarity after months of insanity. Just a few weeks ago, it seemed like Ukraine was being forced to prepare for a war with Belarus, as Lukashenko made his mobilization comments. We analysed those comments and what they could mean at the time, so check out our video to learn more. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure that you are subscribed to The Military Show so you don't miss any of our commentary on the latest developments in the Ukraine war. And thank you, as always, for watching.